Now, recently the NBA announced its 2010 All-Decade team, and it was headlined by guys like LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and even Steph Curry. Now, to me, those are no surprises. Those guys are top 5 players at their position of all time. But there were a couple surprises. James Harden and Kawhi Leonard rounded out the 2010 first team All-Decade squad. Am I the only one who has an issue with that? Listen, I get how great those guys have been, but if we're talking about All-Decade, that doesn't mean being good in just the last couple years. That means the entire decade from 2010 to 2019, you were official. So on this journey, I'm going to break down why those two guys actually shouldn't be on the first team, but rather the second team. And I'm going to tell you who I think should be alongside LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Steph Curry on the 2010 first team All-Decade squad. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Journey of a Ballaholic, the best talk show for basketball addicts. I'm your host, General Hannibal X. Now, in this episode, we're going to be discussing the 2010 All-Decade team. Now, once again, there's two names on here that to me, they don't belong. They absolutely do not belong if you're talking about the first team All-Decade, and that's James Harden and Kawhi Leonard. Now, let's go ahead and put this out there. These two guys are elite. These are two guys that have the potential to end their career as top 5 players at their position of all time. They have the potential to get there. But James Harden and Kawhi Leonard, they've got to do a little bit more compared to these other names that I'm going to give you. Now, I'm going to throw this name out there because I don't think he makes this cut, but he has an argument. And that's my favorite player, Kobe Bryant. To me, as we know, when you look at the 2000s All-Decade team, Kobe's on that team with LeBron James, Tim Duncan, Shaquille O'Neal, guys like whether you want to put a Jason Kidd or Allen Iverson or Dwayne Wade, those guys, right? So Kobe's on that squad. But he's got a case that you could argue for the 2010. I mean, he was a 7-time All-Star, Finals MVP. The guy was, 2-time first-team All-NBA, right? So Kobe won, I think he was an All-Star MVP. So Kobe has a resume that you could throw out there to throw into the conversation. Once again, 7-time All-Star. But here's the reality. He was only the first 4 years of that decade that was he in true form, and that was because of the Achilles injury. So let's take Kobe out of it. But if we're going to take Kobe out of it because he really only had about 4 solid years of that decade, how do we put somebody like James Harden? Or how do we put somebody like Kawhi Leonard in the first team? The biggest issue that I have is with Kawhi Leonard. He doesn't belong in the first team. Not at all. But I'm going to start with James Harden. Because James Harden has a legitimate case here. You got to remember this. James Harden is a legitimate, one of the best scorers we've ever seen. Ever. And the last 2 years, he's led the league in scoring, put up insane scoring. Last year averaged 36 points per game, which is higher than the scoring Kobe ever averaged. I think only Michael Jordan and Wilt Chamberlain averaged more. So he's got a legitimate case, but that's one season. The year before that, he led the league in scoring. He's had a year where he led the league in assists. But this is my issue with James Harden and who I will put in over James Harden. How about his teammate right now? If I'm talking about the entire decade, from 2010 until last year, 2019, how could we not put Russell Westbrook over James Harden? Remember, at the beginning of that decade, it was Russ, not Harden, who was the better player. It was Russ that was the starter, not James Harden. When that OKC team went to the finals in 2012, it was Russell Westbrook that was the second best player on that squad. James Harden, the first couple years of the decade, came off the bench. Granted, he won a 6th Man of the Year award, so you have to give him credit for that. But he only is a 7-time All-Star in the decade, that being James Harden. Russell Westbrook has made it 8 times. Russell Westbrook has 8 All-NBA appearances. 8. Compared to James Harden, who does have 5 first-team All-NBA. And like I said, the last couple of years has been absolutely undeniably great. But he's got 1 MVP to Russell's 1 MVP. He's got 2 scoring titles to Russell's 2 scoring titles. James Harden has 1 assist title while Russ has 2 assist titles. And let's not forget Russell Westbrook averaged a triple-double for an entire season. When he won his Finals MVP, his team wasn't a top 2 to 3 seed as typically all MVPs are. That's because of how great of a season and how great of a feat that was to be the first player to do it, and he did it for 3 straight years. Russell Westbrook is a guy that you have to put in that first team All-NBA because the sustained excellence. Granted, he's not the player he used to be. I get that. Over the last couple years, James Harden has surpassed him and become the better player. But we can't just have the recency bias to just look at last year or the year before that, where James Harden has been better than Russ, and remove the first 8 years of the decade, where Russ was actually the better player. So, to me, it's a tough one. That's a tough debate there. But I've got to go with Russell Westbrook over James Harden. Now, the last guy's Kawhi Leonard. And to me, I don't even understand why there's much debate here. I get it. I do get it. Kawhi Leonard is the reigning Finals MVP. I get that. He did something with Toronto that had never been done, where a guy joins a team for the first time ever, wins a championship after winning a championship in the other conference before, and won Finals MVP on both squads. I get that. He had a historic run, so I'm not knocking what he did last year. But that's 1 year. The year before that, he missed basically the entire season. Kawhi Leonard, if you really think about it, he's had about 4, maybe 5 legitimate years as a star. I would say his maybe 2 years as a superstar, but he's got like maybe 4 to 5 years as a bona fide all-star in this league. Granted, he's only got 3 first-team All-NBAs. For the entire decade, he's got 3. 3 All-Star appearances for the entire decade. 3 All-Star appearances. Come on, like, I get the fact that he won a Finals MVP with San Antonio. I get the fact that he's a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. I'm not discrediting his career, his resume. He's one of the top 10 small forwards of all time. But if we're gonna put him as one of the best 5 players, then how about a guy like this? How do we forget about a guy, if we're gonna talk about his two-way ability, right? And I love the fact that he started off as a defender and then he transformed into an elite offensive player. I love that. But what about a guy like Chris Paul? To me, Chris Paul's resume is better than Kawhi Leonard's for the decade. I get that Kawhi Leonard is better now. I get that Kawhi Leonard now is in the running as a top 3 player in the league for best player in the game. I get that. His high is higher than Chris Paul's high was. But we're talking about sustained excellence here. Well, that's what we should be talking about. 2015, 2016, that's when Kawhi broke on. That's when he broke out as being a role player for San Antonio to start to become an all-star. Now, if you want to talk about recency bias with James Harden, I think even more so, recency bias came into the decision to put Kawhi Leonard over a guy like Chris Paul. I mean, once again, people, you got to remember this. Chris Paul is a 7-time All-Star in the decade. In the decade. Chris Paul is one of the best two-way players that the NBA has seen during his era. 5 times he's made All-NBA, whether it was first or second team. So, mind you, more All-Star appearances than Kawhi. He's got an All-Star MVP, which Kawhi doesn't. He's got more first-team All-NBAs than Kawhi, more second-team All-NBAs than Kawhi. But look at the defensive side. Yes, Kawhi Leonard has Defensive Player of the Year awards. I'm not discrediting that. He's the best on-ball defender, the best two-way player in the game. I get that. Or he was the best two-way player in the game. What Kawhi doesn't have that Chris Paul does is that sustained excellence, even on the defensive side. Chris Paul is a 6-time first-team All-Defensive member. Chris Paul led the NBA in steals not once like Kawhi did, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times in the decade. while also being a 2-time assist leader. So you're talking about getting it done on both ends of the floor. Chris Paul orchestrated that New Orleans Hornets, the LA Clippers, before Kawhi Leonard got there and started making them into the contenders that they are. It was Chris Paul that was headlining that Lob City and Clipper Nation. We can't forget about those years if we're going to talk all decade and not just the last couple years. Kawhi Leonard has never played more than 74 games in a season, and he's only done that twice out of his entire career. So, yes, playoffs should be graded higher than the regular season. I get that. And once again, what Kawhi did last year was amazing. What he did last year, you could put up there on the level with the Kobe's, the LeBrons, the Michael Jordan. You could put that one particular playoff run on that level. But the regular season matters. Just because Kawhi Leonard wants to do this load management thing and only play 60 games and no back-to-backs, we can't let that start to become the norm. We have to give credit to guys who compete during the regular season. 2015 was the first year that Kawhi Leonard started to become an all-star, all-NBA level player. Remember, let's go back to 2014 when he won his first Finals MVP. Kawhi Leonard was a role player. Let's be very clear about that. He was a role player on that team. He wasn't the best player. He wasn't even the second best player on that team. He was third in scoring during the regular season, averaging 12.8 points a game. Third in scoring. And even when the playoffs came, he was tied for third in scoring on that Spurs team, averaging 14.3. 12.8 in the regular season, 14.3 in the playoffs. That's not elite level. That's not elite level player. That's not an elite level scorer or offense player. He was an elite level defender. And when he got to the finals against LeBron James, he won the finals MVP because of his defense on LeBron by holding LeBron under 30 points per game, which is pretty much the only reason he got it, because LeBron still averaged over 50% from the field, or almost maybe 50%, something close to that from the three, and averaged 28 points per game. So he slowed LeBron down, but he only averaged, 17 points per game, even in the finals, which was still not the leading scorer on that team. He was number 2. So I'm not here to really knock Kawhi, because I love his game. I love his tenacity. But at the end of the day, he doesn't belong on the first team. James Harden and Kawhi Leonard belong on the second team all decade. Now, they put Kobe on the third team, which, like I said, I can admit I've got some bias there. Maybe I thought, maybe he should have been second team, but I get it. He only had 4 elite level years. Other years after that were kind of just ceremonial years. I get that. But if you're gonna knock him for him only having 4 elite years, we got to do the same thing for Kawhi. So LeBron, no question. Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, there's no question for those guys being the cream of the crop for the decade. Not Harden, not Kawhi. Maybe they can challenge for the 2020 decade. Now that's where James Harden, especially with what he's doing this year, averaging about 38 points per game. If Kawhi Leonard could win a championship with the Clippers and become the first player ever to win a Finals MVP on 3 different squads, now 2020 could be their decade as far as being a first team guy. They haven't earned the first team for the 2010. Not when you've got guys like Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook, who had a sustained level of excellence. What do you think? Let's take the big 3 out and just look at the last 2 guys, Harden and Leonard. Do you think they deserve that first team nod? Or do you think that Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook earned it over them? Or is there somebody else that I'm forgetting? Do you think maybe an Anthony Davis or a Dirk Nowitzki, a Dwight Howard? I don't know. Who do you think deserves to be the first team for the 2010 decade? Leave a comment below and let me know. As always, I appreciate you for taking a look at this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel, hit that like button, and tap that notification bell so that you can stay updated with the journey of a Ballaholic.